Welcome to Watch Symposium. I'm Austin. All right, so let's talk about one of the most iconic aspects of a Rolex watch, the Cyclops. Now, the date magnifier, aka the Cyclops, was first patented by Rolex in 1950. And 3 years later, in 1953, it made its first appearance on the Datejust. Now, the Datejust was first produced in 1945, and for the first 8 years up until 1953, it had no date magnifier. But from 1953 on, the Cyclops was present, and it was included on other models as well, like the GMT, and then eventually on the Sub in 1966. Now, the story goes that Hans Wilsdorf's first wife, well, not his first wife actually passed away. May passed away, but he was remarried, and his second wife, Betty, was nearsighted and apparently had a hard time reading the date, hence the idea for the Cyclops was born. Now, Rolex has never acknowledged that, and it's sort of an urban legend, so we don't really know if it's true, but that's the way the story goes. And Hans Wilsdorf himself was really protective of this bit of Rolex technology and wanted to dissuade other watchmakers from using it. I mean, it was, to him, a very Rolex element. And 2 years after they started using it on the Datejust in 1953, in 1955, 2 years later, he issued a statement, and it goes like this. He wrote, "To all watchmakers, we draw your attention to the fact that the watch crystal with the specifically shaped magnifying lens is a Rolex exclusivity protected in Switzerland and abroad. We will not hesitate to instigate legal proceedings against any counterfeiting." So he certainly viewed the Cyclops as something very Rolex and something he wanted to protect and something he was willing to become litigious over. Now, these days you see the Cyclops on watches like Steinhardt's, which makes sense because those are homage brands. But you see them often on really lower end watches. Brands like Omega, Breitling, really high-end brands wouldn't touch the Cyclops with a 10-foot pole because it's such a Rolex institution, and I think they would be immediately criticized for nicking it. But something like this Tudor does have it. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think modern-day Tudors have the Cyclops, but this Tudor, which is around... came out, I think, around the year 2000, does have it. And it makes sense that a Tudor would have it because Tudor's a sister brand of Rolex and was also owned by Hans Wilsdorf. And so I think it makes sense. And it's kind of cool that Tudor does have this kind of Rolex element. But I think they've ended that, and I really think it is a Rolex thing now. All right, so they switched over to sapphire crystal in the 1970s, and interestingly enough, the first Rolex to have a sapphire crystal was the oyster quartz, and these sapphire crystals too had the Cyclops. And it was a little bit different because on the acrylic crystals, they were sort of they were part of the crystal. I think they were sort of shaved down, and so the Cyclops was part of the acrylic crystal, whereas with the sapphire crystal, the crystal and the sapphire are two parts, and they're actually bonded with glue, if you could call it glue. And you sometimes hear or read stories of people's Cyclops is falling off, and sometimes people willingly take them off, people who don't like the Cyclops, and that's always a weird thing to see something like an Explorer 2 sans Cyclops. It looks kind of weird. But apparently you can take them off with a razor blade, which is something I wouldn't recommend doing, but there are two different parts. And so I think for that reason, the Sea Dweller, which came out in 1967, I think that was reference 16660, came sans Cyclops. And I think at those depths, something happened, and for some unexplainable reason, but something related to how deep those watches can go, they were made without a Cyclops. And so from 1967, for 50 years, the Sea Dweller had no Cyclops, and it became really a characteristic of the Sea Dweller. And that changed in 2007 with the ceramic Sea Dweller Red. And if you're asking me, I think that was a mistake. I think it was always nice that the Sea Dweller didn't have the Cyclops. It was an option for people who didn't like the Cyclops, and it was just so characteristic of the Sea Dweller. And it was one of the many things that differentiated it from the sub. And so now, besides the depth rating and some text on the dial, it just looks a lot like a date sub, and that's kind of unfortunate, I think. So these days, the only Rolex with a date and no Cyclops is the Deep Sea. So hopefully that will never come out with the Cyclops. But that's one of the reasons I really like those old Sea Dwellers. I think those are really good value propositions right now. I wouldn't mind getting one myself, but I think it's kind of cool to have, something with a date, but without the Cyclops. And that was just one of the beauties of the Sea Dweller. So what do you guys think? Is that a mistake? I think it was a mistake in 2017 to change that. Anyway, they say, and it used to be, that the date was magnified 2.5 times, but there's nowhere on the Rolex website that states that anymore. And I think that's because for a while they were, and maybe this is still the case, they were coming out with Cyclopses that were just not magnifying to 2.5 times. And I think instead of clamping down on quality control, they just stopped making that statement. So, you'll oftentimes see Rolexes that are totally legit, but that don't magnify to 2.5 times. And, does this one? I would say that looks like 2 to me. In fact, if you compare these side by side, I think the Tudor, that's 2.5 times. That's the way it's supposed to be. My Tudor's got a better Cyclops than my GMT Master 2. Ironic? Yes. But this looks like it's magnifying to about 2. But, again, those specifications really haven't, they have changed, and so it's not like I could make any claims. And if you get a Rolex, then I guess you get what you get, and if it doesn't look like 2.5 times to you when you walk out the store, I guess there's no recourse. But anyway, that's that is kind of an interesting thing that they don't really make that claim anymore, that it magnifies to 2.5 times. That was the case, but I guess they've changed it. Anyway, the Cyclops, a very iconic and interesting aspect of a Rolex watch, and one of the many things that make watch spotting, and specifically Rolex spotting, easy, because you look across and you see that. Well, you've either got a homage, in my experience, a lower tier watch, or you're looking at a Rolex. So let me know, what do you guys think of the Cyclops? I used to hate them. That was one of the reasons I went no date sub, but I like them now. I wouldn't say I love them, but they are kind of cool. And I tell you, there's something really neat about checking the date and looking through and just making use of that little bit of Rolex technology. And you don't get that with other watches. It's a little fun, right? Nobody else can see that but you, right? You got to just aim it right, and it's just a neat sort of little bit of Rolex technology, but it's not for everyone. Do you guys like the Cyclops? Let me know. Take care. Thanks for watching. See you next time.